Happy New Year and welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. This is our first episode of the new year. It's episode number 64, and I'm so glad you're here. My name is Conrad Weaver, and it's my goal to bring you content that will help improve your life. Before we dive into today's amazing conversation, I want to tell you about an event coming up later this month. January 31st, I am hosting the very first Responder Wellness Podcast Live. It's a live interactive event on Zoom that we're hosting. We're starting this series every last Friday of the month. We're going to host a live event on Zoom that you can join and participate in. Seating is limited, so you have to register in order to get invited to get the Zoom link. So be sure to click down in the show notes to click on the link to register. Registration is absolutely free. We're making it free to anybody who gets the link. And so I encourage you to register now, register early. Don't miss this interactive event coming up January 31st, and then coming up every month for this year, or as long as there is interest in something like this. So be sure to register. The First Responder Wellness Podcast Live event, January 31st, 12 noon Eastern Time on Zoom. Click the link in the show notes to register. Hey, have you ever thought about why you do some of the things that you do, especially after a traumatic event or a stressful situation? Maybe you reach for a beer or a drink, or maybe you find yourself being more hypervigilant, or you're more irritable, or have difficulty sleeping. It doesn't mean you have PTSD. It just means that you have what psychologists call a trauma response to a stressful situation. In today's podcast, I have a conversation with the one and only Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. So Dave is a retired Army Ranger. He's a psychologist and a world-renowned author of On Killing and On Combat and a host of other books. He has decades of experience training military personnel, law enforcement, and first responders. Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman dives deep into the critical challenges that many of you face on the front lines of public safety. And this is an interesting and a deep and important conversation. So please stay tuned. And just a reminder that I'm here every Wednesday with a brand new podcast episode. So be sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. And if you like what you hear, share it with someone, your friends, family, your coworkers, and so forth. I really want to be able to reach more people. And if you can leave a review, I would really appreciate it. This helps me know what you like and what you don't like, and so that I can bring you better content. And so please leave a review. That would help a lot. Hey, thanks again for listening and for watching. And now here's my conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. Well, Dave, welcome to the First Responder Wellness Podcast. It's so great to have you back.
Hey, Conrad, it's always a joy. The mighty deeds that you're doing, the documentaries you produce, and then your dedication to putting this out. Last time we talked about sleep.
Yeah.
And we got a little more to add on that, but I'd like to kind of zoom out today and take your listeners on a story
Sure.
Worth telling, maybe the most important story of all, about murder and death and where we're at and where we're headed and what happens to human beings in that environment.
So what has brought you to where you are today? What is front of mind for you? What are the things that you're thinking about and talking about?
It's always about curiosity. That's us. We're the monkey. We're curious. We want to pull everything apart and see what's in us. It's in our nature. So I enlisted in 82nd Airborne in 1974. Now, I had worked on a Wildcat oil rig in the Panhandle of Nebraska. Moved up to North Dakota. I did January, February, March of 74. In the winter on a Wildcat oil rig. Those guys, they couldn't spell OSHA, let alone comply with it. Single most dangerous thing I've ever done. Truly,
Wow.
just seconds away from death, two different times. Quick reflexes, 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. And I turned 18, and those guys, they're somewhere around April, May, as I recall. They found out I was lying about my age. I was only 17, 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. They said, dude, turn 18. We'll take you back. We want you. We love you. But 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week in the winter. I turned 18 in August of 74, enlisted to be a paratrooper, infinitely safer than what I was doing before. And we had Vietnam veterans all around us. We were America's, first force. We were airborne. We could punch out here, punch out there. We're always on alert. And we had Vietnam veterans all around us. And we wanted to know what combat was like. And they wouldn't say. It's like this profound taboo. And I really realized right there that the ultimate taboo and the area most worthy of our endeavors is combat. It is taboo. Sex has been done to death. There's no aspect of sex that hasn't been just done to death. You want to really expand the umbrella, look at human aggression, look at combat and fighting. Just kind of close the loop. My book on killing came out in 1995. Marine Corps Commandant's required reading list. It's ever since translated into 8 languages. Last I checked, I got 16 books published, most of them in several languages. But Google Scholar, scholar.google.com. Look up any published work and see how often it's been cited in other works. They got to measure scholarship that way. That's pretty cool. I looked my stuff up, and On Killing's been cited over last out of 3,600 times. Pretty cool in English. And I want to talk about it. I thought was at the core of the matter was killing, and that's what I did my research on. Now, fast forward, young private, young Sergeant Grossman talking to the Vietnam vets. They wouldn't say what it was like. It was like this taboo topic, and I came to realize kind of like sex, right? If somebody says, "Hey, buddy, how's the sex life going? How to get it on? What you wouldn't tell them." But if Masters and Johnson, some scholarly research, you might tell them. I didn't tell them the truth. And so fast forward, Captain Grossman, getting my graduate degree en route to teaching at West Point, I conducted interviews, and they would tell me. And they would tell me things that they'd never told anybody before. And early copies of the manuscript of On Killing, this is, I thought the heart of the matter was killing. Early copies of the manuscript would be sent out, and mostly the spouses, the Vietnam veterans, the World War II vets by the hundreds, Vietnam vets by the hundreds, presentations at their reunions and interviews. Of course, almost all those World War II vets are gone now, and we're losing Vietnam vets at a pretty steady rate. And the wife of the vet would read the manuscript and say, "Well, is this what it's like for you?" "Oh, let me read the damn book, I'll tell you." and then the spouse would make a copy and send it off to other spouses. And it really became, it took over 10 years, but I wrote the book On Killing. Now, not murder, but we're expanding it to murder. I have a book right now in the works called On Murder. A guy who is in prison without parole for committing murder. And he contacted me, and I said, "Let's write the book." Another whole story out there, but we point to some terrible crime in the news. "Oh, that proves that mankind's a killer." Well, maybe, but that's an outlier. It's 1 in a million. We're a nation of 1/3 of a billion people. That one terrible crime you hear about today is 1 1/3 of a billion. So you explain to me the 99.999999% of our citizens who didn't kill him in a day. Explain that. Divorce, infidelity, layoff, traffic accidents, in a lifetime of provocation. So murder, now we'll talk about murder. Murder is being held down by medical technology. The number of dead people is a lie. The number of dead people just misrepresents the situation. And we'll talk about that. But very roughly, we have 1 per state per day, about 50 murders a day. And of course, it's not distributed like that, 1 per state, but it's mostly in the large cities. I think of 1 murder per state per day. That's astoundingly small. And why don't people kill each other off far more often? And there's this huge array of physiological, psychological, social factors that enable restrained killing. We know how to turn them on with military veterans. In World War II, we found out the majority of our troops wouldn't pull the trigger. We know how to turn it on. We make killing a conditioned response, overcome that hardwired resistance. You see, every species, when they confront their own species, almost always restrains killing. Animals with antlers and horns, they fight each other head to head in a relatively harmless fashion. Any other species go to the side, they gut the gore. Piranha will sink their teeth at anything that hits the water, except another piranha. Fights to other flicks of the tails. Snakes will sink their fangs at anything except another snake of the same species, and they wrestle each other. So when we're angry, when we're frightened, when the forebrain shuts down, and the midbrain takes over. We slam head on into that resistance to killing. And there's many ways to overcome it, but in the military, we overcame it by turning it into a conditioned response. In World War II, we taught our soldiers to shoot bullseye targets. We have no known cases any bullseyes ever attacking our troops. If you've been in the U.S. Armed Forces since the Korean War, you never once shot a bullseye. Man-shaped silhouette popping in field of view. Hit the target, target drop, stimulus response. We turned killing into a conditioned response. We really kind of tricked the brain. We kind of overcame that safety mechanism to make killing a conditioned response. And oh, by the way, the video games can do the exact same thing to children.
I was going to ask you that thing. Yeah. How does that relate to today's world? Where Call of Duty is such a huge game and so many people are into it.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, right? I said 1995. It was 3 years before Columbine, 2 years before Jonesboro. I said, it looks like we're raising a generation of mass murderers. And we got to understand all the things we've done to restrain violence in our schools. We make it a hard target. We got people that can shoot back. These things work in restraining violence. But in spite of all we're doing, every year we get a new all-time record dead by violence in our schools. Now, these juveniles committing these crimes have never happened in human history. What is the new factor? Oh, the semi-automatic high-capacity military weapon? No. M1 carbine, World War II. 6 million semi-automatic high-capacity. They flooded the market after World War II. Up until 1968, any kid at any age could order an M1 carbine through the U.S. mail, and the mailman would deliver it to your house. And we would go to change that law. There's not some evil new gun out there. What is a new? It's psychotropic drugs. Well, is that what's happening in Mexico? And in my presentation, it's worldwide. It's what's happening in Canada and Mexico. What's happening, in the Bahamas and all these other nations. What's the new factor? Think like a scientist. Think like a detective. And there's a lot of factors. But one of them is the violent video games. Another one is turning the killers into celebrities. The media has blood on their hands when they do that. You may remember the mosque massacres in New Zealand. This guy live streamed himself. It looks just like a scene from one of the games. Sure. He live streamed himself committing a massacre in 2 different mosques. And the Prime Minister of New Zealand said something really important. She said, this man did what he did for fame, notoriety, and we will not give it to him. She said, New Zealand will never show this man's picture. New Zealand will never say this man's name. New Zealand will not even give him his name. Boom. Somebody gets it. Make him nothing. Make him nobody. Maybe for the first week. Tell us a name. Show us a picture. Boom. Shut it down. The way they're inspiring these kids. We just recently had a massacre, multiple homicide. They're not shootings. Shootings an Olympic sport. We're in such denial. We can't even call these crimes what they are. It was a double homicide in the school and then a suicide by the perpetrator, a girl in the school in Madison, Wisconsin. And these crimes are all around us. And this girl in Wisconsin was just obsessed with the Columbine killers. The media coverage of the Columbine killers has been an inspirational factor in so many of the others. She listened to the same music. She wore the shirt with the same band. She was obsessed online. Her parents had just put her in this Christian school. Now, interesting, we've never had a juvenile in a faith-based school commit a multiple homicide in the school. Outside attackers come in, but a student in a school, in a faith-based school, has never committed a multiple homicide. I can only find one solo homicide until December 24, when this girl murdered 2 people. Now, she had just transferred into the school. It was her first semester in this faith-based school. But and she was obsessed with this stuff. So the media turned them into celebrities. And we'll talk later about the George Floyd effect and the Ferguson effect and the crime rate and all the other stuff going with it. So I understand that there's this huge resistance to killing. But we can overcome it. We know what to do about it. Now, with that said, let's lay the foundation. My next book, what I thought what was at the heart of killing was, heart of combat was killing, but it wasn't. So those that fully prepare themselves, the act of killing is just not that big a deal. I mean, look at World War II. Yeah, some had PTSD, but the vast majority didn't. Some committed suicide, but the vast majority didn't. They had what we call post-traumatic growth. They were the greatest generation. So I realized killing's important. It's scholarly, but the really important book was on combat. It was Marine Corps Commandant's required reading list still, translated in many languages. It was translated in Ukrainian. Hmm. And in January of 24, it won the Ukraine Book of the Year award.
Wow.
In May and June of 24, they brought me out to Ukraine and had me training across the nation from Lviv to Kyiv and everywhere in between. Hmm. I was training Ukrainian troops. And of course, they're always small groups. You put together a large group, they become a target.
Sure.
And this was the book that was selected and embraced by so many people. Hmm. PTSD and physiology and aftermath. It became a real bestseller during the pandemic in the medical community. Did a lot of medical podcasts. One of the medical podcasts said it turns out the stress of the ER during the pandemic is not much different than the stress of combat. So that's really kind of the capstone book. We wrote a follow-on book on spiritual combat because in the end, that's an important factor in the equation. Several other books that talk about it. Mm-hmm. But go back then, interpersonal human aggression is the most psychologically toxic, corrosive thing anyone will ever face.
Can you describe that? What is that? You said interpersonal aggression.
Yeah. The DSM, the Bible of Psychiatry and Psychology, talking about PTSD, the DSM says, whenever the cause of your trauma is human in nature, the degree of trauma is usually more severe or long-lasting. Hmm. But you tell me, is there a difference between these two scenarios? Scenario one, tornado hits a house while you're gone, puts your family in the hospital. How do you feel about that? Oh, thank God they're alive. Mm-hmm. Scenario two, criminals break in the house while you're gone and beat your family in the hospital instead. Now you feel any different? There's all the difference in the world.
Yeah.
The physiologically, they're the same. Psychologically, there's all the one is a random act of nature. The other is an intentional malignant act by a human being. Now, I tell everybody, don't copy pity party here. But the single most corrosive, destructive thing you will ever face is violent crime, interpersonal human aggression. You think the firefighter prepares for the fire, the diver prepares for the sea, the pilot prepares for the sky. How much more so must we prepare for that toxic realm called combat? Mm-hmm. And that's really been my life's goal. You know, when 9/11 happened and the wars began, I had been training law enforcement. My book on killing was out. Law enforcement bring me out. But I realized what's at the heart of the matter is not the act of killing. If you peel away the layer of the onion, it's how the mind and body responds to somebody trying to kill you. Mm-hmm. And this physiological dynamic, like auditory exclusion. Now, last year, my book on hunting, I've wanted to put this book out for a decade. You can't understand combat. And we can do another whole show on hunting. The physiology, the economy, the ecology, everything about it. But you can't understand killing. You can't understand combat until you understand hunting. As a species, we've always been in the middle of the food chain. We've been the predator and the prey, the hunter and the hunted. And that says a lot about us. There's no fun to be hunted. There's no fun to be prey. But when you hunt, hunters will tell you, you don't hear the shot and your ears don't ring. Now, they'll never talk about that until you ask them. Oh, yeah. We siloed this information. No hunter talks to others. Hey, I didn't hear the shot. My ears didn't ring. Oh, me too. Nobody did that. It's like this taboo. How could we have had 500 years of gunpowder combat, 500 years of gunpowder hunting, not let people, hey, by the way, the shots are muted and ears don't ring. By the way, hunters, you are still getting hearing loss. Mm-hmm. The shutout is in the nerves, the ears still being hammered. Wear hearing protection when you hunt. You'd be a deaf old geezer like Peanuts a pain in the butt. So how in the world could we have had, that's why I'd say this is an area of human knowledge that's never been pursued. The very fact of auditory exclusion, slow motion time, tunnel vision, memory gaps, memory distortions, and then re-experiencing the event and how that can become PTSD and how to prevent it. That's what this book's all about. Mm-hmm. So, I want to take a minute and take on a little ride, understanding just how stinking bad it has become in recent years when we talk about violence in our nation and worldwide. Mm-hmm. And you just is that a good place to go now? You had a question?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in the Ukraine connection because I've been to Ukraine 4 times over the last number of years. I haven't been since the war started, but I've been wanting to. I have a lot of friends there, a lot of friends on the front lines,
Yeah,
and friends that are doing amazing work over there.
yeah,
So I'm really fascinated by your work there. What was their response to your teaching there?
yeah. You know what? I would do 2 or 3 presentations a day, always with a real limited window, and no more than an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And with the translation, slowing it down even more.
Sure.
So, I wrote this book. My son just retired after 9 combat tours, 3 Bronze Stars. This is the book I wrote for my son going into combat.
Mm-hmm.
My grandson is deployed to Kuwait right now. Mm-hmm. And this is the book he read, and prior to joining the army. I told him there's 2 things I want to home in on. Number 1 was sleep deprivation and the terrible, terrible harm that we're doing to ourselves when we're sleep deprived. And this is absolutely huge. If you're sleep deprived, your body's already under stress, enormous stress. And if something traumatic happens, those stressors amplify each other. So, how critical it is to sleep and quality sleep. And I talk about just 3 things. Cut off caffeine shortly after lunch. Sleep in total darkness, which means a sleep mask. Mm-hmm. And understand as an adult, you need at least 7 hours of sleep a day. Those 3 things. Now, sleep deprivation is a key factor in suicide. Since we talked last time, I'm doing an online search. Sleep deprivation, suicide. Boom, come right up. Mm-hmm. And one of the best studies says not only is sleep deprivation a key factor in suicide, it's the most remediable factor. Mm-hmm. We can't do much about your finances or your relationships, but we can get you good night's sleep. I was thinking now. Mm-hmm. And talk about suicide. And I lost a brother and 2 nephews to suicide. I studied it intensely. And I am enraged that I didn't know this, about this link between suicide and sleep deprivation. So right now, it is physically impossible for you to take your life. You can no more take your own life and overcome the drive for self than you can with your eyeballs looking in the back of your head. It's physically impossible. And so what happens is you got all these problems and you add alcohol, and alcohol becomes the catalyst that makes it possible. Alcohol inhibits these dynamics, and you seek a temporary solution to a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Mm-hmm. But what we're understanding now is sleep deprivation does the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. And you're only drunk for a short window. Mm-hmm. And little kids aren't getting drunk, and teenagers not that much. So what we're seeing is teenage girls' suicide rate tripling in America. Mm-hmm. And the new factor is sleep deprivation. The sleep deprivation is doing the same thing as alcohol. Mm-hmm. It's toxic, it's corrosive, and it's destroying us.
Yeah. Do you think that some of the suicide epidemic issues across the culture has to do with sleep deprivation?
Yes.
As a result of this little gadget?
Yes. The video games, the social media, the head of Netflix said their competitor is sleep. They don't care that they're killing people. They want to sell their product.
That's chilling, if you think about it.
Yeah, this is my book. I was invited to the White House as part of President Trump's roundtable on violent video games. Invited back to the White House to brief the vice president. Both hands had a chance to put one book to the president, and this is the book. And so come with me to 2005 in California. The state of California, it's all in here. The state of California overwhelmingly voted to regulate children's access to violent video games. Hollywood said, we're good at this. Silicon Valley said, we're good at this. Arnold signed the bill. I'm good at this. And the video game industry fought all the way to the Supreme Court to sell any game to any kid at any age. You cannot regulate us. You cannot stop us. And they conned 7 old men, 7 Supreme Court justices, probably never played Pong in their life, overturned the California law. Now, evil is when you take this incredibly attractive, sleep-stealing type device and you fight all the way to the Supreme Court, to select the children. Mm-hmm. When you come across the line to evil is when you start harming children for money. Mm-hmm. and these incredibly seductive, attractive, and truly corrosive and undeniable. You can't stop doing it. Mm-hmm. They're so desirable and so attractive, and vast amounts of money are made and make these games more attractive and more addictive. They're addictive, and they're stealing their sleep. So I got kind of one little study to get here. This is kind of one of the key factors that I cover in there. And this is a good little study, but it said that poor sleep quality or sleep deprivation is associated with a 5 times greater increase in PTSD, 9 times greater rate in depressive disorder, and 6 times greater rate of suicide. Now, this is not a causal relation. It's not even it's a toxic interactive relationship. Mm-hmm. We can't do much about suicide. We can't do all that much about mental illness and depression, but we can get sleep under control right now.
Do you think that's a cause? Do you think that's also a cause of the violence and the aggressive behavior in people?
We have 200 years and 10,000 studies showing the link between alcohol and violent behavior. Mm-hmm. Nobody can deny it.
Sure.
And sleep deprivation is just like alcohol. Now, we don't have the studies to prove it. Mm-hmm. I tell you with all my heart, you've gone right to the heart of the matter, and you pinned the tail on the donkey. The sleep deprivation is a key factor in this violence.
Because we know that sleep is when the brain reorganizes your day's activities and puts it in all the categories and all the places that it needs to be.
Yep. After 24 hours without sleep, your impaired judgment equal to 0.10 blood alcohol level above legally prone.
Wow.
On the 3rd day without sleep, you are psychotic. Any graduate of Army Ranger School or SEER School would have about hallucinations on the 3rd day without sleep. And we have people all around us going days without sleep. And we wonder what's going on, what's the problem here? And the sleep deprivation. So here I am back in Ukraine, really nailing this. And these guys they're 2 years into a terrible war.
Yeah.
And they're all like, yes, yes, yes. But when I talk about sleep, one guy said, well, a company commander level rank. I don't know what that is in command, but probably company commander level. He said, the Russians are bombing us. You never know when it's going to come. You can't sleep. So I play video games instead. His buddy was like, dude. Everybody else like, dude, are you hearing yourself? Did you understand what you're saying? All these years of warfare have told us you can sleep in anything. Mm-hmm. We recently had a Marine artillery battalion in Syria. And just about 2 years ago, they came home. They fired some fire missions, came home. They had terrible suicide and terrible PTSD. Oh, it's firing all these fire missions. No, it's not. Folks, in World War I and World War II, for years on end, people fired artillery for years on end and did not have this happen. What was happening was they were firing those fire missions, and they go back to their barracks and they play video games and they watch movies instead of sleep. And that's the new factor in the equation. I trained a Army infantry battalion that was punching out to Iraq. And the command sergeant major told me, he said, on the last deployment, we were in a barracks environment at night and combat patrols during the day. I told the troops, it's lights out at 2200, 10 o'clock. Said, if I find you up playing video games, after 10 o'clock, I will take your video games. He said, a week later, I had a closet overflowing with video games. He said, these are good troops. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't disobey an order, but they can't not play those damn games.
It was like a drug.
I had another company commander level guy in another presentation. So, well, I have terrible nightmares. See, I have terrible nightmares. And so I just watch movies, so I don't have to have those nightmares. And his friend all saying, dude, once again, hey, are you hearing yourself here? Mm-hmm. You're proving his point. So these things give an illusion of control, an illusion of progress that is so seductive, but they're kicking our tail. Mm-hmm. And throughout human history, when you weren't fighting, the very first thing you did was sleep. You eat, crap, and sleep. Those are the priorities. Boom, knock them out. And that's what they did. And then we've got all these desirable things to do that are eating on lunch. Now, back to Ukraine, short window. My grandson's in Kuwait. My son's at 9 combat tours. What if that was my son? Oh, absolutely. What if this was my kid? And I had a chance to spend 1 hour to prepare him for combat. And the first half was about sleep. And if you're sleep deprived and the bad stuff comes down, you're far, far more likely to get a pathological response. But the second half was this. It's out of my book on combat, and it's about perceptual distortions in combat and auditory exclusion. The shots get muted, and they're all like, "Whoa, dude, I can read my mail." This is like nobody's talking to each other throughout human history. We haven't said, "Hey, were the shots quiet for you?" Yeah, nobody's talking about that. It's like sex, right? It's just taboo. It's all being siloed. And then I talk about tunnel vision. 80% were conscious of tunnel vision. And this is a law enforcement study of cops after a gunfight. And again, it's in my book on combat. But 80% were conscious of tunnel vision in the study, but we think it's more like 100%. They just don't know it. When we do our force on force engagements, it's not kill or be killed, but it's hurt or be hurt. If firing bullets, it hurt. And when you do it the first time, the body treats it like it's real. And we're videotaping it. You're losing the majority of the learning if you're not videotaping it. And afterwards, they look back at the videotape and said, dude, that was right in front of me. I never saw it. Mm-hmm. That's tunnel vision, and you didn't even know it. Mm-hmm. So I think what's happening, all of these have survival mechanisms that weave into hunting. If we as a species have been in existence for 24 hours, up until the last 6 minutes, all we did was hunt. Mm-hmm. So if you want to find a reason why these things are happening, you got to look at hunting. And the only other place besides a combat where you see these responses is hunting. And so this tunnel vision, auditory exclusion, by the way, sound is a weapon in nature. The lion's roar is a deafening, stunning, multi-harmonic attack. And being able to tune out the sound in the heat of battle would be a survival mechanism. And tunnel vision, we're like a laser-guided missile. We're a heat-seeking missile. Our vision homes in, and boom, that's tunnel vision. And that's a predator. It's a positive predator response, or autopilot. You do not rise to the challenge. You sink to the level of your training. Slow motion time. I have had hundreds of people tell me they can see the bullet in combat. Now, it's not like the Matrix where it crawls past, but if you ever done airsoft or paintball, you track it, that's what's happening. And 3 different times, people were able to walk up and point where the bullet hit. No way they could have done that. They weren't tracking it. But I was in Long Island about 2 years back. I had NYPD, a bunch of regional cops there, and U.S. Marshals team. The Marshals just recently been in a horrendous gunfight. One of the Marshals told me, she said, I'm going. It was in a warehouse. It's a narrow corridor, and coming down the corridor, gun in hand, that guy pops around the corner and shoots me. She says, I flipped back and shot, and she said, I watched his bullet go past and clip my hair. Mm. She said, I watched that bullet go past and clip my hair. I'll tell you about slow motion time. So again, this is a survival mechanism. Memory gaps. Half of all trained seasoned cops have blackouts. Memory gaps. And 1 out of 5.
Why is that?
Well, I think what's happening is there's too much data coming in too fast. And there's aspects that doesn't get processed into long-term memory. And they're not necessary for survival. Go back to our hunting dynamic. Those memories are not essential. No, I had one cop tell me, he and his wife, I always encourage spouses to come to my training. And a guy, we had all-time record number of cops murdered in the line of duty. Maybe we'll just back up and do another whole presentation on the murder thing. But not only do we have a record number of cops murdered, we have bad guys come to the house to murder their family. Mm-hmm. But mama there protecting her cubs, most dangerous thing on the planet. And the cop's wife killed this guy. And she said, I never lost a second of sleep over killing that guy to protect my children. And I believe her. And so that's where you'd want it to be. Mm-hmm. If you could choose how somebody responds, you'll be okay. Mm-hmm. And the vast majority are. And they feel bad. They don't feel bad. Yeah? Mm-hmm. But she said, you know what really bothered me? She said, I heard my voice on the audio recording of my 911 call. And to this day, I have no memory making that call. It was really bugging her. Then somebody said, look, it's in the book, page 55. It's normal. Boom, she was all right. Psychologists call that normalizing. That's too trivial a term for something so powerful. But you can't just, it's normal. You got to show it to them in the book. Just show it to him in the book. It's normal. And then boom, she was fine. But then the other thing, 1 out of 5 had memory distortions. They just flat remembered something that did not happen. And they're almost always something bad. They're almost always something bad. I was with a Navy psychiatrist recently, awesome guy. You have him on the show. He was a congressman and a psychiatrist, and he was in country, worked with the Marines in combat. And this one Marine in the hospital said, I didn't shoot the bad guy, didn't take the shot. Well, the bad guy killed my buddy. And it's my fault. I didn't take the shot. But the squad came and saw him in the hospital. That's so important. And said, dude, you never even had a shot. It wasn't even in your sector. It could not possibly have been you. See, these are the memory distortion. I'll give you 2 other examples. A young cop in Indiana about 3 years back, young black cop, super squared away young man. He said, you're right, things are out of control. He said, I've been in 3 deadly force incidents in just the last 2 years. He said, last time a guy drew a knife and we're arm's reach away. When you start a knife fight, arm's reach away, you're going to get cut. At some level, he told him, I'm going to get cut. I'm going to keep fighting. He drew and fired, hit the spinal cord. That guy dropped like a bag of rocks. Hollywood shoot him one time, they fly away. No. But he hit that spinal cord, boom, they dropped like a bag of rocks. He never got touched. But he said, I had this vivid memory of blood on my hands. I kept looking for the blood on my hands. The peer support guy picked him up. Now, they're going to the hospital. Peer support, powerful, positive program. He was fine. Always go to the hospital. I worked with some cops in Utah a little while back. There's a roadblock, a crime scene, cops all over it, cars backed up. One of the cars pulls out and starts revving to plow through the cops, vehicles, weapons of mass murder. But the cop was there, sidestepped, drew, and killed the driver. And nobody got hurt except the driver, the bad guy trying to plow through the bodies. He said, went home that night, took his pants off, and the entire left side of his leg was black and blue. He said he'd been hit by a car and didn't even know it. So I would go to the hospital. So they'd come back to the cop with blood in his hands. He said, peer support guy on the way to the hospital finally said, dude, for the last time, there is no blood on your hands. Stop asking me. So it'd be so much better if they knew this ahead of time. We had a Navy SEAL, maybe 15 years back, a Vietnam veteran. He said, I got to confess. After all these years, I just got to confess. On this one mission, we went in the hooch and we killed all these Vietnamese. His buddy said, no, dude, that didn't happen. It wasn't possible. Here's the timeline of the mission. Here's the reports of the mission. It wasn't physically possible to have happened. So that's another example, one last example of memory distortions. Police chief told me that cop's talking to a suicidal kid. Cop knows a kid trying to cop him. Cop's got a gun out. Kid's got a gun under his chin. Finally, the kid says, okay, I won't do it. Drops his gun. Cop brings his gun down. Kid pulls the gun up and kills himself. Cop said, I shot him. I had an accident. No, you didn't. Yeah, I had an accident, Sergeant. I shot him. No, you didn't. Your weapon never fired. Entry wound was here. Here's his ejected brass. It wasn't you. It couldn't have been you. I shot him. So the chief said, we sent him into the grand jury and we coached him. Said, dude, here are the facts. Your weapon was never fired. There were no composite on hand. You never fired a weapon. His weapon was the one that fired. The entry wound was here. Could not have been you. You've got to go in the grand jury and you tell them the facts. The chief said he did. Came out on the way out. He said, Chief, are you sure I didn't shoot him? So that's how powerful those memory distortions could be. And it is so important to know that they can happen.
So why do they happen?
Well, once again, I think what's happening is you're misfiring in there somewhere. The body is examining possibilities, and they're hardwired as a reality then. There's some kind of a breakdown in there. It's happening in roughly 20% of the times, 1 out of 5, sometimes trivial terms, sometimes almost always something negative. And I think what's so important is to know this stuff ahead of time. So as I'm talking to these guys in Ukraine, I say, here's a critical component. You've got to get together afterwards and do a debriefing. You fill in the memory gaps, sort out the memory distortions. I'm just fine. I don't need no debriefing. but your body may have a memory distortion, and the only one on the planet that said, no, that didn't happen. But if you don't know ahead of time, these things will happen. And you're blindsided by them, and you can't believe that it's not true. If you know ahead of time these kind of things happen, then you're far better able to deal with them. It's so much better to be vaccine than antibiotics. We truly, my life's goal is to go out there and vaccinate people and to get them to understand. And so during the debriefing, here's a critical component. When we talk about PTSD out of the DSM, you can have every single one of the symptoms. It's only when it lasts at least a month. We say, okay, now this is dysfunctional. Re-experiencing the event is normal.
Sure.
How you deal with it will decide whether or not it becomes PTSD. And what you got to do is got to make peace with the memory. Got to separate the memory from the emotions. During that event, the sympathetic nervous system was kicking off like nothing you've ever had in your life. And there's some hardwired network that's established. Like a kid touching the hot stove. I'm going to touch my hot stove one time, and it's woven in. Don't ever touch that stove again. And so these hardwired memories are there. You talk about it, you think about it, and you re-experience it. I give a great example. It was given to me of a young Arkansas state trooper. First gunfight. Bad guy's down, he's alive, happy ending the story. He says, a week after my first gunfight, I'm sitting in the bleachers with my wife, watching our daughter at a swim meet. And it must have been a starter's gun going off when I didn't expect it. But boom, heart's pounding, gasping for air, drenched with sweat. His wife thought he's having a heart attack. He didn't know what was happening. And now this is a critical juncture. What if he spent the rest of his life trying to never think about it? I can't go to swim meets anymore. I hate 4th of July. I can't go hunting anymore. I can't do my job anymore. You will literally drive yourself crazy trying to not think about it. You got to make peace with the memory. You got to separate the memory from the emotions. So one of the key tools is sympathetic nervous kicking off. How do you bring it down? Big swig of water. One of the key tools we have to pull you from fight or flight, sympathetic nervous system, to rest and digest, parasympathetic mechanism, is a big swig of water. A friend of mine is a therapist for a federal agency, and they're guys in a deadly force incident. They fly her in. And she's with us, trying to separate the memory from the emotions. But today she puts that bottle of water in front of them. And every time they start to become emotional, it makes them stop, take a big swig of water. And she told me, she said, 6 years of college, 14 years of practice, and that stupid bottle of water doing more good than I think I'm doing. Now, if the water doesn't work, the breathing is a good tool. But if the water doesn't work, we got a lot of other tricks in the bag. And one is EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprogramming or reprocessing. And what you do is you think about it and you follow a visual stimulus. You talk about it. And see, the midbrain is a very simple mechanism. Only do one thing at a time. While you're following that visual stimulus, the midbrain's busy. You talk about it, you think about it without it coming for a visit. And after just a couple of times, what you've done is you've rewired, you've reprogrammed, you've reprocessed your thinking. Separate the memory from the emotions. So again, come back to Ukraine. It's so important to do that debriefing, fill in the memory gaps, sort out the memory distortions, and separate the memory from the emotions. And the
Back
tool
to your
we have
water example, a few months ago, I was at a conference and had a psychologist talking about that very thing, talking with law enforcement on how to de-escalate, a bad guy that they have in custody, and he's just going on and on and on. Well, you stop and say, "Hey, I think you need to have a drink of water," and that can just help start to regulate that
I tell
person's
my
brain.
cops, look, say you got a victim of a crime. You're getting a statement from this victim. Now, if that individual becomes emotional, A, you don't need all that drama. B, they're moving down the path of mental illness, associating, rewiring and hardwiring the memory and the emotions. Put a bottle of water in front of them. Crack the seal, put a bottle of water, just the power of a gift. And every time they start to become emotional, make them take a big swig of water. A, you're getting the calm, rational state. And the need B, send them down the path of mental wellness. From the very first time they talk about it, they separate the memory from the emotions. So but you don't always have a bottle of water. You can always stop and breathe. Breathing is usually autonomic. When you bring it under conscious control, everything else comes with it. The autonomic nervous system is sympathetic and parasympathetic, fight or flight, feed and breed. And when you do the breathing, bring it under conscious control, the rest of the autonomic system can come with it. So these are all mechanisms. I break the memories, the emotions, and there I was out in Ukraine, had a brief window, and they were so incredibly receptive. And like I said, that they just said yes, that's what we need to do. Yes, we can do that. I've seen it. 26 years. I retired from the Army in December '97. And it's been over a quarter of a century on the road. I think I'm the only law enforcement trainer ever to be post-certified in all 50 states, every federal agency, many other first responders. And there's always this cycle where people say, yes. It's like I've over and over, I can say, this happened, and that happened, and that happened, and that happened. And all of a sudden, they can talk about it, and it's normal. Like I said, this is the final frontier. The ultimate taboo, death, and sex has been done to death. This is where we can begin to gather information and send our civilization further.
So in dealing with all these folks, and you've been around, traumatic stuff, a good bit of your life, what do you do to take care of you so that you can come out of these things in a healthy manner?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll tell you, one of the most stressful things I've ever done is doing these classes in Ukraine. Now, almost always sitting at a table, and they always have water in front of me, and the folks that were kind of bring me along said, make sure you got water for him. And over again. I mean, who am I to be talking to these guys? Who am I? And I just got my little offering to make, and may it be of value, but it's so important to communicate with calm. And over again, throughout the presentation, I'd stop. Take a big drink of water, separate the memory from the emotions. When we talk sympathetic and parasympathetic, fight or flight, feed and breed. And a common term for the parasympathetic is feed and breed. And there's a biological backlash in which rest and digest or feed and breed comes to the top. And a lot of people after a traumatic event have very intense sex. Both partners invest in and it happens to crime victims, and it scares people. I had a chance to talk to all of the U.S. Army's sexual harassment and assault investigators and counselors. I said, what looks like a pattern of promiscuity might actually be a normal biological response. You just need to know this. And we need to guard against it in ourselves. And if you know that's going to happen, you won't be blindsided by it. It's amazing how many first responders get in trouble every year having sex on duty. But I tell them, it's normal. Make the most of it. But be sure you are off duty. It will still be there. I promise. All these things are so important about being forewarned and forearmed. And you see these drives, save them for appropriate time and appropriate partner. We're blindsided by these. And so being a better person, being a better leader. I had a chance to talk to all of the state of California's sheriffs, minus like one or two, about leadership. I said, being a better leader is about being a better person. Being a better person is about self-control. And nobody respects your temper tantrum. They respect your calm. Being a better leader is never about screaming at people. You've all had leaders that screamed at you, despise them. Don't be that person. And what we've got to do, the fight or flight response is up here. We've got to put it under control. Oh, the fight or flight hormones kicked in. I couldn't help myself. I choked him out. Okay, we understand. No problem. No, we don't excuse that. Oh, the rest and the feed and breed hormones kicked in. I couldn't control myself. No, we're not buying that. But if we know fight or flight is normal, we know we got to control it. We know feed and breed is normal, and we know we've got to control it. But the next step forward in human development is to not lose your temper. You see, the core of resiliency, what I teach is the Bulletproof Mind, one of our books, just a little Bulletproof Mind companion book, kind of a work-long book with a class. But I teach resiliency. And the core of resiliency, Viktor Frankl in a Nazi death camp, wrote some important books. He's a man who did not get PTSD. So he walked out of a Nazi death camp and upstairs was just fine. He said, I realized the only thing in the universe those Nazi bastards couldn't control is how I choose to respond. Now, that's classic Stoicism, completely compatible with Christianity. The things I can control, the things I can't control, and the wisdom to know the difference. The only thing in the universe you can control is how you choose to respond. And you don't lose your temper, you give it away. It's the only thing in the universe you can control. Now, that's easy to say, it ain't so easy to do. But we talk about bringing the autonomic nervous system under control, right? We've got fight or flight, rest and digest, feed and breed. One of the very first things we learn is not to crap ourselves. That's a big deal. You ever potty train a kid, house train a dog? It ain't easy. And we're about 3 or 4 years old, 2 or 3 years old, we learn not to crap ourselves. There is never an appropriate time to crap yourself, right? And there is never an appropriate time to lose your temper. Again, that's easy today, and it's so easy to do. Now, swig of water is one of the tools we have. Another tool is putting candy in your mouth, jelly beans or Tootsie Rolls. I told my cows that I like Tootsie Rolls. They're individually wrapped, the little small ones, They stay clean. They're good in the heat. They're good in the cold. So I have a little baggie full of Tootsie Rolls in the dash of your car. I don't get to have one. Somebody's ugly to you. So I give the finger, somebody disrespects the things that cops put up. I heard a guy say, oh yeah, people are cops because they want to control people. There is nobody on the planet that has more garbage they got to deal with. Just give them the finger and mouth it off and disrespect it. Every time that happens, you have a Tootsie Roll. And you take what they meant to hurt you and it's something positive. So a cop sent me, he contacted me in a class. He said, Dave, I was pounding down Tootsie Rolls. It wasn't healthy. So I switched to Smarties. You know those Smarties? Yep. He said, that little Smartie is my chill pill. Someone gives me a finger, I'd have a Smartie. Now, the only problem is this. He said, you can never have just one of those little things. He says, someone gives the finger, I get a Smartie. I want another one. I can't have one until I'm ugly. So I drive around, smiling and wave until somebody gives me a finger. Give a finger, I get another Smartie. And that is actual cognitive behavior therapy. Through your actions and your thoughts. You take what they meant to hurt you and turn it into something positive. I can have a Smartie. And so that's kind of that biological dynamics. And we strayed quite away from the crime rates and the tragic violence that's happening in our society. We've never seen anything remotely like it. And our first responders out there dealing with it on a daily basis.
What would you say to that first responder who's struggling in their thought life, they're struggling with their mental health? What would you say to them? What's a good first step for them to get to the right place?
Well, one of the pillars of resiliency is faith. And if you're wired that way, it's important. Now, our first responders go to every terrible thing that happened. Your job is to go to the very worst thing that happens. And you can't help it. It's not about faith. It's an existential question every human being asks. How could a loving God allow these terrible things to happen? And the answer is really, really important. And almost every faith worldwide tells us, we're not God's puppets. A loving father would not be some helicopter parent hangs over you every minute of every day protecting you. You've ever heard, if you love something, let it go. If it comes back, it's truly yours. That's how much God loves us. He loves us enough to let us make our own decision. That means a lot of people make really bad decisions. They say, God, why don't you do something? He said, I did. I sent you. And he loves us enough to let us make our own decisions. And we say it on Spiritual Combat, don't curse God when he doesn't answer your prayers well you think he should. You got to recognize the fact that if you're a person of faith and if you believe there's a life after this life, that's the most important thing in the universe. In the end, everybody dies. Did God fail when you die? No. No matter how hard you pray. In the end, every nation falls. In the end, our son will die, but eternity continues. And if you're a person of faith, you can lean into that and not let things of this world pull you down. Another part of the equation is our book, the Christian Book Award finalist, Bulletproof Marriage. People ask questions, what can I do? I wrote a book on it. I literally wrote the book on it. What can we do? Boom. This has been so embraced by so many first responders. I wrote the book doing the best job I could to give you the information and deal with that. But that's it. And listen, how can we help other people if we can't help ourselves?
So this episode is the first episode of the new year. So what would you say to folks who are listening or watching about how to prepare themselves for the new year?
Yeah. Well, all the other things I've said, but also how can we not other people who can't help ourselves? Mm-hmm. It's okay to say I'm not okay. And it's really, really important. We're really good at treating PTSD. Mm-hmm. We're really good. Mm-hmm. And then come out the end with post-traumatic growth. Mm-hmm. The vast, vast majority of veterans did not have PTSD. The vast, vast majority did not commit suicide. They were the World War II generation. We call them the greatest generation. And they have post-traumatic growth. That's what we're really talking about, post-traumatic growth. Mm-hmm. And come out the other end stronger. It was. I first started on the road, so I can nail it. It was like in the first couple of months. It was a Miami detective, old detective, 26 years ago, came up and he said something I've repeated ever since. He said, "You tell these kids not to be the macho man." He said, "The docs are good; they get better every day." He said, "I was in my deadly force incident, and most cops are just fine, but he wasn't, and that's okay." He said, I was losing it. I was losing my wife. I was losing my kids. I was losing my mind. I was losing my job. He finally, after 2 years of hell, just before the divorce, my wife convinced me to get help. 2 months later, it was over. Mm-hmm. As I tried to macho it out. And this is a quarter of a century ago. Believe me, they're even better now. Mm-hmm. You don't have to live with this. And you've got to have a desire to be better. So what happens is we get disability. If I get better, I lose my disability. Time out. No amount of money is worth a lifetime of mental illness. So seek help and get better. And don't be satisfied until you're truly better and separate the memory from the emotions. So just have faith. The world is a stronger, wiser, better place. We got better research. We got better tools. And the world is devoted to giving you healing and the best possible life. And so don't get invested in your illness. Get help and come out the other end as a stronger human being. And in the end, recognize the fact that love is what motivates us. Empathy is love with the shoes on. Empathy is love in action. Nobody does this job for the money. No first responders out there doing it just for the money. You got to realize your sacrifice for a noble and worthy purpose. And you're not going to be stinking, filthy, American dream rich doing this job, at least not legally. You're not going to be a famous celebrity, at least not in a good way. Mm-hmm. And so, it's the question, what if my family trapped in that burning building? What if my spouse who's been assaulted? What if my child who's been murdered? And that's empathy. Mm-hmm. And empathy is love with the shoes on. And love means the worse it gets, harder we fight. I'm 68 years old and I want to be in the fight for another 20 years because I love my family. I love my grandson who's deployed. I love my little grandkids. I love my wife. I love my kids. I love my nation. I love my God. And love means the worse it gets, harder we fight. And you got to lean into that love and know that's why you do what you do. Jesus said, greater love is no one than this. They lay down their life for their friends. So what manner of love is this? That men and women will die for strangers. What manner of love is this? That people will go out the door and put their life on the line for people they never met. But hear that verse one more time. Greater love is no one than this. They lay down their life for their friends. But there are many ways to lay down your life. There are many ways to lay down your life. And sometimes the greatest love is not to sacrifice your life, but to live a life of sacrifice. And that's love.
Well, we will leave it at that. That was a great way to end this podcast, Dave. You always are fascinating to talk to and to listen to. So thank you so much for your time and for your work, your amazing work, not only here in the U.S., but around the world. And where can people best connect with you?
Right. Thanks for asking. GrossmanOnTruth.com. Grossman on Truth, the truth on combat, the truth on killing, the truth on spiritual combat, GrossmanOnTruth.com. All the books are there, and we're at rocking and rolling and able to be of service. And thank you for asking. And God bless you, brother. God bless America. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave, for being on the show today. Be sure to check out the links to his website and his books. They're down in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe and to share this podcast with your tribe. And remember, you are not alone. And if you need someone to talk to and don't know where you can turn, you can dial 988 for help. Until next time, be well, take care of yourself and those around you, and go out and do something great in the world.